I want you all to welcome Angela Albee, who is Oregon Psilocybin Services Section Manager, and Emily York, who is with the Public Health Division of the Oregon Health Authority, who are here to talk to us today about how Oregon came about having a Psilocybin Services section in the first place. How cool is that? And a little about the science of it. We're going to have a few minutes of a program from them and then open up to your questions. But I kind of wanted to start off with talking a little about what happened to me this morning, which was really interesting. At Foot Care, you know, there's at 7 o'clock in the morning, there's a good 6 or 8 people sitting around with their feet in the water and a bunch of lovely retired nurses tending to our feet. And I said, oh, by the way, we're having this program today on psilocybin therapy, and every head turned around and everybody wanted to talk about it. Several people had tried it. One person is deeply committed to it. And there was just so much interest. And I thought, wow, you know, it's been some tough years. And I think a lot of people are really eager to learn more about something that might offer some respite and maybe a biological reset of some kind so that we can all, you know, be sane again. Doesn't that sound great? So I can see Joanna being like, yes, ma'am. So I'm going to hand it off to you two and let you do your thing. And then, you know, we can start. I do have some questions that were sent in by people who are not here. So if it doesn't get covered in what you're going to offer us, then we'll pick up from there. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Angie. And I think you have the PowerPoint, right?
Yes, I do. Quickly, I thought we would Emily and I can introduce ourselves to you. It is really such an honor to be here today. Thank you for your interest. And I'm Angie Albee, as Ann had mentioned, you know, and I'm the section manager for Oregon Psilocybin Services. And Emily and I will be co-presenting today. And Emily, do you want to introduce yourself and just say hello while I am pulling up the presentation?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily. I am a program analyst on the team within the Oregon Health Authority on our policy and engagement program. And I grew up in Washington and being close to the sound. So anyway, it's cool to be able to connect with you all today.
We are thrilled to have you.
And thank you. You know, can you all see the presentation? I just want to be sure. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So we're going to go through some of these slides rather quickly, but we just want to give you a little, you know, just a little overview. So we wanted to just say that our agency, we're very fortunate to be part of the Oregon Health Authority. The Oregon Health Authority has identified how important it is to provide access to any community that has not had access, or you know, there are health inequities that exist. So we have really developed an overarching strategic plan goal to eliminate health inequities by 2030. Very lofty, very ambitious, and also very important to set a framework. So we're lucky that we're creating this and implementing this at this time, because we're able to really consider community, and that's all of you. So thank you for being with us. And we also tie our work to the State Health Improvement Plan. Emily, do you want to highlight any of these today?
Yeah, I guess just to say that this is kind of the first state health improvement plan that Oregon recently adopted, that had a lot of input from community members across our state, and really kind of helped us shift what our priorities are as a state public health division. And there's the 5 priorities listed there, which I think, because we want to get to conversation, I won't get to into, but just to say that, you know, like, there's a lot of intersection with this new Psilocybin Services section becoming a part of what the Public Health Division now offers. And, you know, we're looking at institutional bias, and sort of that extends to a lot of the bias against psychedelics and the use of psilocybin, and sort of the stigma associated with that. We also know from a lot of the research coming out today that psilocybin can be helpful in addressing trauma and toxic stress and, things related to that like PTSD, depression, anxiety. So that's just a quick kind of example where we see this emergence of this new section within our bigger health structure really being aligned with the priorities that are driven by community input.
And so I'll introduce, there was interest in, wow, you have an Oregon Psilocybin Services section. Tell us about that. Well, we were created after the passage of Measure 109. And as most of you know, Oregon is a ballot initiative and referendum state. So law doesn't have to be created by the legislature. It can be created by Oregonians. So ballot measure 109, otherwise known as the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, again, was passed in November of 2020. It created a 2-year development period, which started January 1st of 2021 and goes until December 31st of this year, because January 2nd of 2023, we start accepting applications for licensure. And we'll explain what all of this means soon enough. But just wanted to tell you that we created a section and we are housed within the Public Health Division Center for Health Protection. Our mission is to protect public health and safety, and also in the same breath work on health equity, outreach to partners and communities, and working to assure access to services, even if it's psilocybin services, which I think we're really breaking through in a space that has for many years been taboo to talk about. I'm going to talk briefly about the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board. We do have a board, a very large advisory board. They don't make decisions on behalf of the agency, but they advise the agency and provide recommendations. So we have spent the past 1.5 years working with them. They've brought in speakers, presenters. They've brought in, people that have been practicing psilocybin services around the world for many, many, many years. We brought in Indigenous practitioners or folks that are affiliated or have studied underneath Indigenous practitioners, knowing that those folks have practiced for centuries. So there's this wisdom and knowledge about psilocybin services. It's just that it hasn't necessarily shown up in a lot of published research recently. And Emily will get into that research a little bit more. But this board is 16 voting members and 18 total, so 2 non-voting members. And we have folks that are there that are, physicians, psychopharmacology, we've got naturopath, we have, research, academic advisors, academic experts. We have public health folks. We have harm reduction specialists. We have a consumer of mental health, and the list goes on and on. So if you can imagine, we've got such a wonderful table built and lots of insight. They broke into 5 subcommittees to do a lot of this work to make recommendations to us. And we can talk more if you have questions, but I just wanted to introduce them and acknowledge the hard work they've put into those initial recommendations. So I'm going to start very briefly by introducing Measure 109 and then turn it over to Emily, to balance out the conversation a bit. But it's just important to know, what is Measure 109? That's the big question, right? It's not a dispensary model like cannabis. So you won't be able to actually go into a store and purchase psilocybin and take it off-site with you. Emily will kind of highlight some of this in the presentation, but you have to be 21 years of age or older to access psilocybin services, and you don't need a physician's referral or prescription or a provider's referral in order to access services. One thing about Measure 109 is it's centered on the client and the client's decision or choice about which pathway or which option they'd like to access, which is really interesting. And it also creates opportunities for different licensed facilitators that will be present with them while they're accessing psilocybin, to have different backgrounds and to be able to meet the needs of the client. Emily will get into the structure a little bit more, but it's just important to note that people can come to psilocybin services for any reason. If you are experiencing grief, if you are experiencing end-of-life anxiety, PTSD, there's a lot of veterans that access psilocybin for PTSD. anxiety, depression, trauma, and the list continues. And so Emily will get into that more on the research side. But I just wanted to mention that, you know, we'll explain the structure to you, but it's just important to know that Measure 109 really considered kind of the client being the authority over themselves and making their own decision, which is an interesting shift, you know, and still within our rulemaking, we uphold public health and safety by creating a network to work with those providers if that's important. So we'll talk about that more later. Emily, do you want to maybe just very briefly just list the license types we have? We don't need to get into it too much, but just list kind of what our Measure 109 creates a licensing and regulatory structure. So that's what we're building in our team. And so Emily can kind of talk briefly about those licenses.
Yeah, sure. So to make this all possible, we have 4 different license types. And the first one listed on this slide is the manufacturer license, which you know, creates a clear framework for people to be able to cultivate fungi, psilocybin-containing mushrooms. And a client may choose to consume just dried whole mushroom. It can come in that form, or this framework also allows for those mushrooms to be either powdered and you know, processed either into capsules or perhaps extracted into a tincture, or it could be in some kind of edible form such as a chocolate. So just to kind of give you idea of like that these will be licensed, and then those products will be tracked, and all of the products go to a testing laboratory, which is the second type of license I think that might be on the next slide. Those laboratories must be accredited by the Oregon Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. They are, you know, have specific testing that they're doing both to identify and confirm the species of mushroom as well as the potency, and all of that information again is tracked in the system to ensure safe products are sent to the service centers. The next licensure type is the facilitator license, and to get a license as a facilitator, you must complete a approved training program. We do have the requirement right now that facilitators must show proof of Oregon residency for the last 2 years, although that requirement does expire in 2025. There's also an exam that is administered by OHA to ensure that those who complete a training program also understand the laws in Oregon related to facilitating these services. And then the facilitators can only practice in a licensed service center. So this service center has to have defined boundaries. It cannot be located too close to a school. The look of the service center could take on different shapes. So a lot of people, I think, have this assumption of like, oh, it's going to be, you know, like this medical setting where, you know, sure, some of the maybe randomized research trials have taken place in hospitals and have that kind of feel, but the way the rules are working out, I think that there's a lot of flexibility in what these service centers look like. They could maybe feel more like a retreat center. They could have access to outside, but they must have, you know, again, have those defined boundaries, and the place is, you know, completely licensed and part of, you know, an inspection process in order to come online and open their doors. And yeah, I guess moving on. Yeah, do you want me to?
You know, I think we might have switched roles a little bit here, but I'll start this and then you can talk a little bit, maybe go to the next slide. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay. So I started talking about what Measure 109 does and doesn't do. And if you can imagine, the license types that Emily listed, we'll be actually licensing those folks. And then we'll be regulating. So if there is a concern, you know, our team will go in and investigate that concern. As Emily said, we'll do site inspections of service centers and manufacturer sites and testing labs to make sure that all the rules we adopt are, you know, that they're in compliance with the rules. And we won't get into too many of those details because we want to get to your questions, but psilocybin services, what are they and how does this work? And so again, you have to be 21 years of age or older to access psilocybin. You can only consume psilocybin at a licensed service center. And you can only do that during your administration session. I'll talk about the 3 sessions in just a moment. You also have to be in the presence of a licensed and trained facilitator. So Emily described that license type. That's what that is. Psilocybin services are 3 different parts. There's the preparation session where a client will meet with a facilitator and talk about, their situation and why they want to come in and access services. They'll go through a client intake process. They'll go through informed consent to understand the risks that are potentially associated and potentially some of the opportunities with psilocybin services. They'll also understand what their client rights are and go through the client bill of rights with a facilitator. And then once the client and the facilitator both agree that this is a good fit, that this licensed facilitator believes they can take on this client and this client believes that they entrust this facilitator, they'll schedule an administration session. And that's that point. And Emily will kind of walk through an infographic of what this looks like. I think that's on the next slide. And if not, it's part of the fact sheet and we can get that to you. The administration session, again, only can take place at a licensed service center. The client will purchase psilocybin, they'll consume psilocybin, and then they'll have their experience, their psilocybin journey. And then at a certain point in time, when they take a certain dosage, then they'll have a minimal amount of time they have to stay at that licensed service center. And then they'll leave. And then after that, they'll have an integration session that's optional where they can talk about their experience. So those are the 3 components of psilocybin services. And I think, Emily mentioned this, so we can go through this quickly, but we are tracking the product from the very beginning of the cultivation process until it's sold to a client or otherwise wasted. Wasted being disposed of because maybe it's a faulty product or it's expired. And all of this will go into a tracking system that we're working on. It also helps prevent diversion into the unregulated space. Emily, do you want to talk about local government issues? Is that okay? I know we're a little out of order, but.
Sure. So Measure 109 provided the opportunity for local governments like cities or counties to opt out, meaning that they could refer ordinances to the voters in their jurisdiction, and that voters could, in the next general election, choose to not issue licenses within their jurisdiction. And so a number of local governments, again, counties and cities in Oregon, have chosen to refer something like that to the voters this fall. And local governments can also adopt specific time, place, and manner regulations, which just create kind of more rules around the hours and location and of the operation of licensees. And so we'll see how that kind of all pans out by the end of this year. We expect, maybe that some will end up adopting ordinances that will prevent service centers or manufacturers from operating in specific areas. And in a way, this kind of something similar like this occurred back when cannabis was just, becoming available. And I guess the last thing here to say is just that regardless of whether a jurisdiction adopts any kind of ordinance or other regulations, that all of those who apply for a license to either manufacture or open up a service center will need to have a land use compatibility statement. So they have to have the sign off of their local government before submitting their application to us.
I think we can probably skip over, this part because we really want to talk about access, equity, and affordability. There will be like a 15% tax on the retail sale of the product to the client. But by the time, those funds, go through the Department of Revenue, probably there won't be much left to support the program. We are a fee-based program, so the cost of licensure fees have to cover the cost of our work. We'll just briefly, I talked about where we're at in the development period with Measure 109. I'll just say that we're working really hard right now to adopt rules, which we'll adopt by December 31st of this year. And then we begin receiving applications from those applicants that want to be licensed by January 2nd of 2023. And I just want to take a quick note to say, these are very brave business folks, people that are deciding to step either out of the unregulated space and come into this work, or they want to learn more about it because they're really deeply committed to helping, the overall health and wellness of people. So I just want to take a moment to say that this is not easy work, and we're doing what we can to support our licensees with training and other resources as much as possible. Emily, do you want to, maybe what we could do is kind of move past this and then we can answer questions. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I could just touch on just a couple things really quick, just to let you all know that if you're interested in learning more about the research, there is a scientific literature review that our board was required to produce by July 30th, 2021. So it's about a year old now, but it does have, sort of the overview or summary of the evidence that was available at that time. And it's also available in Spanish. And there's a bunch of other resources on our website that we can point you to, including a recent Q&A summary or frequently asked questions kind of document that we posted just a couple weeks ago. And I think on the next slide, maybe we talk about just sort of what's left for the rest of the year, which I feel like Angie kind of already shared with you. I guess just one thing to add is that we do have an open public comment period that's occurring in November. And that's for everyone to participate in, share their comments, concerns, questions related to the adoption of the remaining rules that are necessary to begin accepting applications next year. And we've been doing a lot of engagement with different partners, as you can imagine. We really enjoy the opportunity to speak with different communities like we are right now with you all. So we appreciate the invitation and are just always looking for recommendations or suggestions for others that might be interested in learning more. We appreciate the questions because the questions kind of help us decide what more we need to be making available, either online on our website or in future education to the public. We see part of our role is not only, regulating, but also just educating and breaking down some of that stigma by just, helping people have access to information and growing that public awareness. And I think maybe the last slide is just some different ways that people can get involved. There's our website, and we do have a mailing list that everyone and anyone is invited to join. We send out periodic, just updates and new publications as they become available.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm going to drop I'll stop sharing so we can all see each other as we start our Q&A. But I will share this website with all of you in the chat box, so that way you can go and see the scientific literature review and read that Emily mentioned, and and also kind of take a look at our calendar. These are public meetings that you can join if you want to learn more about this. And so we're always here to answer questions. So I will drop that in the chat box, and I know we have lots of questions, so we're really excited to be able to answer them. So whoever wants to begin.
Oh, and Ann, you're on mute.
Sorry, I've got a couple that were given to me to ask for you specifically, and one of them was how might psilocybin therapy contribute to mental and emotional health, and are there situations it's not helpful for? Specifically, might it not be so beneficial for long-term SSRI users, which is a kind of antidepressant drug that a lot of people have been using, and apparently there's something about that makes it less effective. Could you just address that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. Emily, do you want to start and then I'll kind of wrap up the question?
Yeah, I feel like it's a multi-pronged question. So the first is addressing mental health issues, and we have seen that in the research that there's emerging evidence of the effectiveness for a number of different things like anxiety, depression. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has designated psilocybin a breakthrough therapy for I forget the exact phrase, but it's like for treatment-resistant depression. So meaning for those who aren't finding relief and progress with using kind of the conventional pharmaceuticals that are often prescribed, that psilocybin is kind of a breakthrough therapy in that way. And of course, there's more research to be done, and there's so much that's even come out in the last year since our scientific literature reviews. So that's definitely something that we'll continue to work on with our board as you know, we get the capacity to update this information, because it's just, you know, rapidly growing, as you can imagine, as this becomes more and more acceptable. And I guess that's something that we didn't really talk about, is just sort of the history of how there was a lot of really promising research done in the 50s and even before that really was just kind of squashed and then basically, you know, prevented for then decades until more recently. So there's a really big gap in time when research around psilocybin for use of mental health and PTSD and other conditions was not granted and funded. So we're in this really exciting time where there's a lot happening and we can barely keep track of it ourselves.
Yeah,
but I don't
Emily,
know. Yeah, go ahead.
And if I jump in a little bit, thank you so much and great job. I want to say that when Emily's talking about the research that, you know, was kind of squashed or quieted, I just want to lend a little history to that. So I think most of you might know that many psychedelics, including psilocybin, were legal until the 1971 Controlled Substances Act was, you know, psilocybin became a Schedule I substance. So there was a ton of research, you know, even dating back to the late 1800s about the benefits of psilocybin and psychedelics. I can't say psilocybin without including psychedelics when we talk about research, because, you know, there's just a lot of profound research that's been published. From that point in the 1970s, there was that lapse that Emily mentioned. And recently, there's been a research renaissance that has really developed since the 1990s, and really showing evidence that high quality 1 and 2 clinical trials that people can really benefit from, you know, treatment for anxiety, depression, end of life anxiety, trauma. There's a lot of veterans, like, you know, I've mentioned before that, you know, really can benefit, as well as, you know, those folks that are experiencing grief. It's also been shown in our scientific literature review that it can help benefit people in a spiritual way. Part of that has to do with the default mode network being sort of disrupted with psilocybin. The default mode network is kind of like when you're driving your car down the road and you take that road every day. So you take the road and you already know to stop at the stop sign, even though maybe you're thinking about your grocery shopping list. And then you arrive and you're like, how did I get here? But you drive that road every day. The default mode network, when it's disrupted, you think, should I take this other road, right? And it shows you other pathways. And so that's kind of like an analogy to the way that some science is showing that it kind of can work on the brain. And it's much more technical, and I am not a neuroscientist, but I just wanted to share that analogy of how it can affect that default mode network and almost provide what many folks consider to be a reset. There's like Emily said, there's a lot of emerging evidence. And to your question about SSRIs, there is evidence about the serotonin impact with psilocybin, and we just don't have enough research to be able to conclusively say yes or no to whether or not folks that have been taking SSRIs for a long time may or may not benefit. I think that depends on many factors. When research is done, There's the synthetic psilocybin versus the natural. Measure 109, as Emily mentioned, will be using the actual psilocybin producing mushrooms, which there's over 200 species for. We're starting with one in Oregon, by the way, Psilocybe cubensis. Tends to be pretty stable, safe. But part of this research, that's one factor. The other factor might have to do with someone's constitution, the way that they, the way that they're processing and their body is actually breaking down psilocybin into psilocin in their digestive tract. There's so many factors that we wouldn't be able to say today whether or not someone could benefit, but I do think that there are lots of studies that both show perhaps people could still benefit, and then others that show that perhaps people may not as much. And so because we're seeing a lot of studies that kind of focus on very different things and there's lots of nuances, I would just hesitate to answer that question at this time. So I did see, I hope that's helpful. I've seen some questions pop up in the chat box too, but that was a lot of information that Emily and I presented to answer that. And so I just wanted to stop and take a breath and see if any of that needs clarified before we move on to the other questions.
Well, one thing that came up is that if you missed this when we whipped through it, the SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they're the most commonly prescribed antidepressants. So what we're saying is sometimes people with a long history of taking antidepressants of that specific sort, there's been some evidence, but maybe not a ton, that might not help them so much to get a good effect from taking psilocybin. But as we're hearing, maybe that isn't really the case, or we don't know yet. Like so many things. We have a couple questions. One is there any way that an end-of-life client can be presented with this drug in their home when they're bedbound? And I'm assuming she means maybe here in Washington.
Yeah, so Washington doesn't have a piece of legislation yet that they're actually implementing, although we are in contact with Washington. I've met with them many times, and they do have a work group. There was a piece of legislation, and I don't feel like I can speak on behalf of Washington, so I'm just saying, I know there was a piece of legislation that didn't pass, and then there was a budget note that directed the Department of Health to do a work group to see about, what the potential, what the recommendations might be from that work group. And so I think that's where my knowledge in Washington ends, really, other than they're very curious about what's happening with Measure 109 implementation, and they're staying very connected, and they've got some great folks that are on their work group and paying attention. So with Measure 109 in Oregon, unfortunately, because of the structure of the language, you wouldn't be able to take psilocybin off-site from a service center. So people would have to come to a service center. We know that that's limiting, and definitely before we leave this meeting today, I'd love for Emily and I to be able to address equity, access, and affordability concerns, because this is definitely an access issue. And while we can't change the statutory language of the measure as a state agency, we're hoping that this is something that, as we evolve this work, that we can address so that we can open up access to folks who are unable to be transferred. And so all of that said, we have considered those folks that can be transferred but might not be able to consume by swallowing, might have swallowing issues. We did allow for psilocybin products to be administered through an alternate method to bypass that process of swallowing. So we did leave some space for that. But unfortunately, right now, as we start to implement, this will have to all happen at a licensed service center.
But it is true, though, that anyone around the world can go to Oregon and access this treatment. Is that correct? Or will be able to, not yet?
Yeah, there's no restriction on residency for those folks that are clients. So this will be made available. And so I'm assuming that when we start licensing in 2023, it'll take not very long, 3 to 4 weeks for psilocybin to be cultivated, and maybe a little longer for that psilocybin to be processed from the dried mushroom state. But I think, we expect in the second quarter, and definitely by the middle of 2023, that there'll be hopefully some psilocybin services available. And we're really hoping, Emily has done some great work working with our Secretary of State's Office of Small Business Assistance to partner to create resources for our future licensees, because we know how important having licensed service centers really will be to access. So look out more. And of course, if you sign up for our distribution list, I did put the website in the chat box. As Emily said, we'll get lots of information distributed.
Thank you. Another question came up saying, what's the approximate timeline if someone was to go to Oregon and stay at a B&B or something? And by the way, it seems like a great opportunity for little B&Bs to be like little hostels, right? But suppose somebody from Washington were to go down, or somebody from Switzerland or whatever, and make an initial contact and so are we talking about a week, a month, a couple days?
That depends on lots of factors. I'll first say that there are certain requirements for licensed service centers. So that's something that it will be really important to follow. We're working through the rulemaking process now. Of course, we've had recommendations from our advisory board. And now we'll be going through rulemaking this fall to develop those rules. And some of those locations might be impacted by what a licensed service center can or can't be, but there is a lot of flexibility. And I do think that there are some issues around the definition of residence. This can't take place, a licensed service center can't be a residence, but it has to be a separate defined premises. And so I do think that there are lots of opportunities there for what these service centers could look like. So all of that said, if someone came down and decided they wanted to participate, there might be licensed service centers that have employees or contractors that are licensed facilitators that you'd be able to meet with for a preparation session, and probably be able to have an administration session shortly thereafter, meaning like maybe the next day, depending on the scheduling. And then, the preparation and the integration session, while we don't have those rules finalized yet, we're addressing some of these conditions now, and we won't have those final rules adopted until December 31st. Our advisory board did recommend that the preparation session and the optional integration session be able to be held virtually, so people would have the opportunity to not have to be in person. That also is a cost issue, for the clients, and also, if you have to schedule people at a licensed service center, that would eliminate maybe some folks from coming in to access services. So I think we'll see a lot in our rules, and I know we're really trying to honor those recommendations from the board. So I would imagine you could probably come down for your administration session after a preparation session, and probably participate in your integration session, afterward through a virtual meeting of sorts, if that licensed service center decided that that was the way they wanted to offer those services.
I can see field trips in the future. Here's another one. What is the data behind reports that continued use can impact the liver, and there is some concern about impact on the heart? Is that something?
Yeah, so I'll just mention, definitely take a look at our scientific literature review for some available published literature and studies. I will also say that I haven't heard as much about the liver. I think, everything, the liver has to process lots of things. And so I think that, I'm not sure I've even seen studies that were concerned about the liver so much. We have talked about in our advisory board. By the way, I'm also the executive director of the advisory board. So in this space, I'm going to speak on behalf of the board, and instead of the section that's doing this work. But the advisory board really met and had deep conversations. Again, we have lots of physicians around the table, many of which discussed this. And there are studies that exist concerned with like heart valve issues for repeated use of psilocybin, but those weren't found to be high quality studies and high quality research by our advisory board. So I would say that it's really not something that we can, as an agency, can really respond to. But I will say that the advisory board, all of those meetings are recorded and on our website, so you can go back and listen to some of these discussions. There have been concerns with heart issues, but because there's not anything conclusive yet that our board could really point to as high quality research, you know, they chose not to make a recommendation that would limit folks that had heart issues from accessing services.
Well, thank you. It sounds like there's really not enough current research to be able to track, even though I suspect there actually has been a fair amount of ongoing use. It may not have been documented in any useful way. So is that going to be part of what happens in Oregon, that some of these will become de facto studies? Looking more at, like, because some of the questions I'm getting is ongoing usage safe, microdosing safe indefinitely? And it sounds like maybe we don't know enough about it to say yet. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Or?
So I'll make this two different responses. Great questions, and I'll do my best here. We have to be really cautious about, as an agency, representing research that we weren't involved with, and also determining what is high quality and not, because none of us are professional researchers, and we do have professional researchers that are part of our governor appointed advisory board, and they did look through this research. So I just wanted to mention that just for your awareness. Related to, I think I'll remind me of the first issue that you wanted. Will you remind me of the two parts of that just briefly? Sorry.
All the way back, you mean?
Microdosing was one piece that I want to address, and then the one before that.
Yeah, just is ongoing usage safe, and is microdosing ongoing? Are both of those safe processes? And I think, I mean, I don't know. So I'm saying, my understanding is, like, there would be an initial experience, guided experience, and then some people I know are doing what's, you know, some people call it nibbles, or some people call it microdosing on an ongoing basis. But I'm assuming those are kind of two different things, right?
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned, will this be a part of ongoing research? So I think that was the first part of the question I want to just address. I was going towards, sorry. So there is not a research license currently in Measure 109. So, you know, there's also something really important that we need to consider, and that's this is not a science experiment. This is not a research experiment. These are people's lives, right? And so client confidentiality is really important to this, making sure we protect client information. It is a part of the statutory language of the measure that no information will be shared without the client's consent. So I just want to mention that, because I think in a time of data security and privacy concerns, you know, and there's, you know, it's something that, you know, I just wanted to bring up. Unfortunately, we don't have a resolve to a research license. So, you know, right at this point, our biggest concern is clients being able to access services, right? So we hope that we'll see more research and information specifically on Measure 109 in the future, but we're just really trying to get the nuts and bolts of this built. We have 4.5 months left, which is amazing to think about. And so I just wanted to speak to that quickly. About microdosing, our advisory board made recommendations to offer lower dose administration sessions for psilocybin services. And what that means is that you would still have to go to a licensed service center in order to consume and purchase psilocybin, but perhaps you could take a lower dose, right? There is a lot of microdosing happening, and that word means many things to many people, so I don't actually use that word. Some people, microdosing is, you know, once a month, sometimes it's once a day, sometimes it's 3 on 3 off. Everyone has something else they follow, and so you know, microdosing is just a really general term, so I try to avoid it as much as possible. I will say that while in the unregulated space, there's been a lot of, you know, people talking about the benefits, and what we're able to speak to is really kind of what we're providing in Oregon under Measure 109. But, you know, I also want to acknowledge that the unregulated space is a space where there's been, after psilocybin was made federally illegal, people were pushed into the unregulated space, what some people call the underground. And so that practice has continued. And, you know, even to this day, after centuries of use by Indigenous communities, there's still, you know, a tremendous amount of stigma and risk associated with that unregulated space. And so we're hoping that Measure 109 allows an opportunity for folks to participate legally in psilocybin services. And the lower dose administration sessions are how people could, you know, take the substance more frequently. So I hope that's helpful. I mean, I do think microdosing happens more in the unregulated space, and I just want to acknowledge that we're unable to really speak to that.
That's fine. Let's circle back to sort of equity and accessibility. There's a question about any idea of what it will cost. How will clients pay? Will there be any financial support available?
Yeah. I'll start this, and then I'll have Emily kind of come in because I've been speaking a lot to these answers and want to bring her into this too. But I'll start kind of explaining a little bit about affordability, and then a couple of equity and access concerns we have, and then see if Emily would like to, you know, share anything else to fill in the gaps. First of all, because we're a fee-based program, again, our fee structure prohibits us from really having extra funds available. We have to only cover the cost of our services and nothing more with licensure fees, and that's how we're funded. So there is not currently a funding source that could help subsidize the cost of licenses for those folks we license, or subsidize the cost of services for clients who might be low income and might want to participate in psilocybin services. There's a lot of discussion about how perhaps state general fund could really help support that work from the psilocybin community, but at this point in time, this is what we have. We don't have the statutory authority as Oregon Psilocybin Services to regulate the cost of psilocybin products or services, or the training programs either. So those are businesses that are able to set those fees in whatever way they want to. There have been some discussions about philanthropy and donations, and also social equity plans, and lots of different ways that perhaps could subsidize those costs. So I do think it's important. We have talked about how we create equitable licensure fees under Measure 109, looking at low-income licensees, veterans, you know, and ways, nonprofit organizations, and ways we could really, you know, create more equitable fees. There's a lot of concerns around constitutionality and what we can and cannot do, and so we're working through that now. And I think in our rules, you'll definitely see the ways that we've tried to address that. By the way, our rules will be coming out to our distribution list and posted on our website by September 5th, if not before. So if you want to sign up for the distribution list, and you'll be able to read those rules. If you have trouble sleeping at night, they'll probably put you to sleep pretty quickly, but they are fascinating. So a quick note on access. We talked a little bit about the, you know, folks that are unfortunately unable to be moved and to get to a licensed service center. And that's something that, you know, is a concern for us. But we do hope that people will be able to be, you know, transported in to participate. We talked a little bit about consumption and how if you can't swallow, there's an alternate method of delivering psilocybin products and things like extracts. But I do think that also something that we need to consider for equity is the fact that the war on drugs really disproportionately impacted communities of color. And that can be seen in the incarceration numbers. It's data-driven information. And as we think about the impact to those communities, we're really trying to find ways to bring them into this conversation as much as possible, as well as individuals with disabilities, LGBTQIA+ community members, and, you know, anyone else that hasn't been able to historically have access to our system, and all communities that have not been well served by government. And we know that's a lot. And so we acknowledge that at the Oregon Health Authority, and we're doing our best. And I would love if Emily, who is really dedicated to doing a lot of really important partner outreach, Emily, would you be willing to talk a little bit about how we're centering equity and a little bit of that work, just for the benefit of talking about equity as well?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think one of the ways that we're kind of moving forward in our community engagement is, we have these big public forums, like our public listening sessions that we held last month, which are open to everyone. But again, just recognizing that this is a Schedule I drug still, people may not feel comfortable coming into a big, virtual forum and speaking their mind, that we've been really trying to just connect with community-based organizations across the state that are serving or affiliated with different communities, and working together with community leaders to create more safe spaces for people to feel comfortable participating and asking their questions, and an environment where they're kind of among community members, and just the meetings aren't recorded and posted online. And so that's one way that we've been doing some kind of specific outreach. And I guess the other thing I just wanted to say, and might be really obvious, but just that, this is the launch, right? We're getting ready to launch something, and it's not going to be perfect. And I think we, as a team and the greater community that's been supporting this implementation of the measure knows that, word for word, this measure is not perfect. And although it's where we're starting from, and it sort of creates the container that we have to right now operate within, that there are a lot of other states, I think, like Angie said, including Washington, that are looking at that and seeing, okay, what are the lessons learned? How can we continue to improve this and create more equity and write that in from the get-go? And so I think there are a lot of those things that people are talking about already. We have an equity subcommittee that continues to meet, that's a part of our board, and is working through some of these issues and having, ideas generated. There's also like an equity task force that's getting going, and that will likely be connecting with lawmakers down here in Oregon and thinking about how to make some of these changes. So anyway, I want to put it out there that I think there are a lot of great ideas and ways that we can continue to improve as we move forward.
This is so amazing. You're doing such an ambitious, like far-reaching, incredible scope of this project. I'm really impressed and really grateful too, because you're really creating a model that, like you said, other states are watching, I'm sure. Many grad students are probably lined up panting to get started on doing some of these studies, right? But it's really a gift to many communities. I'm so grateful that you're including tribal people who have this experience going back centuries, and not just, starting off saying, we white people know all these science things. Like, that's so refreshing and beautiful. And I'm really glad that you made time in your busy schedules to come and visit us and listen to all our questions. I would have one more thing that I would like to share with you, that one of the comments was, bravo to Oregon and your team for working to put this option in the toolbox of people who need this, especially at the end of life. And that's something we're all really, thinking about ourselves. So thank you again. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to mention particularly, or?
Yeah, I mean, I probably could talk all day about this, and I'm sure Emily could too. We appreciate your time. I want to give a nod to the team. We are a team right now. We just hired 2 new people. It was a team of 6, now we're a team of 8. So I was hired last June as a section manager, and I hired my first team member in July. And we continued to build out the team, but until last Monday, we've been a team of 6 people. And I'm just really proud of the accomplishments of this fabulous team. I wish I could introduce you all to everyone. And I just wanted to mention that because we're currently supposed to be a team of 19 people. And we have had some infrastructure challenges due to COVID response, you know, and so I do want to mention that. And the other thing is, you mentioned tribal community, and I quickly just wanted to say, Oregon has a government to government relationship built into law that we follow and honor. And so, you know, we met early. I participated in a tribal monthly meeting and presented Measure 109. I think because psilocybin services cannot happen on tribal lands right now because they receive federal funds. And so there's a conflict there. We're really focused right now on still working closely if they have any comments on rules from those Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes, and working through that government to government relationship, but also working with tribal members in the community who might want to either be licensed off of tribal lands or participate in psilocybin services. And that can include people that identify as Indigenous or as a tribal member, either Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes, unrecognized tribes, and there's so many more tribes across the nation. So, you know, the devastating history of, you know, the federal government and tribal nations is a difficult one. So we're really trying to be mindful to center their voices as much as possible.
You have taken on so much and done so much in such a short time. I'm really, really impressed. You must have a great deal of energy. But I'm glad you have good help. It sounds like you got a great board and a great team forming and so much more to do. But I really thank you. Unless, does anyone else have a question you want to bring forward?
I
Jerry?
do.
Jerry, speak up.
So I'm a chronic pain sufferer. I've been what I call microdosing psilocybin for at least 10 years. I have chronic pain that's never going to go away. And I have a past history, I used psilocybin and hallucinogenics my whole life. But I've had 3 major surgeries, all my surgeons, anesthesiologists. I used the pain clinic at Virginia Mason, my pain psychologist, my pain doctor. They all know I microdose psilocybin. I've had many nurses and people tell me that I'd be a perfect candidate for a research project. And for a while, I did try to find a research project I could be a part of. In it, I don't know if you would be any chance of helping me find, because I don't have a problem being a research person. As again, you know, I have pain, you know, in the extreme 1% severity. And I never heard you mention a price on what it would cost to get psilocybin. And I haven't taken any in 5 months because I just finished my radiation treatment for cancer.
Oh my, I'm sorry to hear that, Jerry. We just have a couple minutes. So if there's a quick, you know, way to say, is there a way for us to get, if we want to see this program in Washington, what's our step? What's our next step?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jerry, I just want to say, just, you know, you've been through a lot, and so tremendous strength getting through that. And thank you for your questions. Quickly, I'll say we don't currently know about the research and studies that are going on. We don't have that like on our website, but I'm gonna definitely, if we hear of anything, we'll send that to this group and keep you informed. And also the cost, quickly, I'll just say, we don't really know. We've heard anything from $800 to upwards into the thousands, depending on what kind of model. Like,
what's $800?
Well, that's the whole point, is we don't know what the cost is. And these are kind of the retreat model costs. These aren't the maybe urban centers that might be seeing people more frequently and not like out somewhere staying for a week. So I couldn't tell you because, again, we don't set those costs. But once we have more information, definitely we'd love to keep you informed. And I would just say, if you want to get involved in Washington, there is a work group happening, and I am happy to find the email address that's appropriate to get access to that information, or the website. And so give me a couple of days, but I will definitely find that for you.
Thank you, both of you, Emily and Angie. You've been very generous with your time and your amazing information. This is awesome. I'm really grateful that you are so willing to share with Washingtonians and not just keeping it to Oregon. I'm hoping to see this happen in other states too. So again, thank you so much for your time.